Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Aparna Sudhakar, Assistant Professor from the Department of General Medicine, Sri Lakshminarayana Institute of Medical Sciences. The topic for today's class will be rabies. Most of you would be knowing that rabies is an infectious disease predominantly affecting the central nervous system. As early as 1800s, it was identified to be caused by an infectious agent that can be spread from a rabid dog to a healthy dog. Then later on, it was identified to be caused by the rabies virus, and it is transmitted. This virus is transmitted by a number of vectors, which includes both the canine as well as the feline species. The disease can manifest either as an encephalitic form or as a paralytic form. Majority of the depictions of rabies is usually of the encephalitic type, and most often, almost all the time, it results in death. If you look into the rabies virus, it is a single-stranded RNA virus. So you have either an RNA virus or a DNA virus, which can be single-stranded or double-stranded. The rabies virus is a single-stranded RNA virus. It belongs to a family of viruses known as Rhabdoviridae, and under this family you have Lissa virus and vesiculovirus as two different genus. And the genus Lissa virus is where rabies virus belongs to. Now, the term Lissa was coined from the term of a Greek goddess of madness, which clearly depicts the characteristic clinical features which a patient infected with rabies would manifest with. Now, under Lissa virus genus, you have various other viruses. Rabies virus belongs to the genus Lissa virus, which belongs to the family Rhabdoviridae. Apart from human beings, the rabies virus is going to affect a large number of animals, and most often it results in a very severe neurological disease in human beings. Now, if you look into the virus again, it is an enveloped virus. It is a single-stranded RNA virus. So this RNA will have nucleoprotein, phosphoprotein, etc. And it is a neurotropic virus. That is, it is typically going to target the neurons. And it is transmitted via the saliva. So when the human beings come into contact with the saliva of an infected animal vector, either a rabid dog or a cat or any other wild animal, this rabies virus is transmitted. If you look into the epidemiology, it is basically, again, as we had described, it is transmitted to the human beings by the bite of an infected animal. Now, because the children are more susceptible, as well as people in the rural area where you have many such unidentified as well as poorly treated animal bites, it is more common in the rural areas, especially among children. Now, the United States has actually achieved elimination of endemic canine rabies. Though rabies is still spread by other animal vectors, canine rabies has been eliminated from the United States as well as many of the developed countries, whereas countries like India and many of the African countries are still endemic to rabies. So your animal reservoirs include dogs, cats, raccoons, skunks, foxes, and also cattle. So what the United States actually did to eliminate this canine rabies was to target the species, the canine species, with bait having the rabies vaccine. So basically, these are some of the, this is a picture from Harrison's textbook, which depicts the various vectors in particular areas of the United States. We see along the western coast, you have one particular animal vector which is more common compared to the eastern coast. In India, it is still predominantly canine rabies. Now, since in America, endemic canine rabies has been eliminated, there is another important vector, that is bat. Again, rarer cause of transmission can be with people who are working in laboratories researching this rabies virus when they're exposed to aerosols, or people who enter caves where there are numerous bats which can be infected with the rabies virus, or following solid organ transplantation or corneal transplantation. These are rarer forms of transmission that can occur apart from the contact animal vectors. And human to human transmission is extremely rare. Now, if you look into the pathogenesis, what happens once the virus is transmitted? So the virus is first inoculated from the rabid animal through the saliva after a bite or just contact of the saliva with an exposed skin surface. Now what happens when after the bite the virus actually multiplies and replicates within the muscle, and then it goes into the neuromuscular junction where it binds to the acetylcholine, nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. Then what happens is it ascends, it gets transported into the brain where it infects the central nervous system and produces the characteristic encephalitic form or the various neurological manifestations. Then this is its centripetal spread into the central nervous system, and from the central nervous system there is a centrifugal spread, and the virus goes and gets deposited, or it goes and stays within various other organs including the salivary gland. Now initially there can be an incubation period, either a few days or even up to 3 months or even more than a year in rare cases. Initially what happens at the site of inoculation, usually the site of bite or the site of contact of the animal saliva. So sometimes what happens is during this incubation period, the virus is actually found to reside in and around the site of bite or the site of inoculation. And then what happens is this virus goes and binds to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors of the neuromuscular junction. Then it ascends through the peripheral nerves into the central nervous system. So this would be the incubation period where the characteristic clinical manifestations wouldn't have started. Then what happens is once it enters the central nervous system, it causes various neurological dysfunctions, and then it descends centrifugally, goes and gets lodged within the salivary glands, even the heart. So these are the various steps. First, you require an animal vector to transmit the infectious agent, that is the rabies virus, via contact with the saliva. The virus gets inoculated into the human host. Then the virus replicates, binds to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, then it ascends. So there is a centripetal transport of the virus into the central nervous system where it causes neural dysfunction. Then there is a centrifugal descent of the virus and it gets deposited within the salivary glands, the skin, other organs, even the heart, as well as the sensory nerve. So basically this is a neurotropic virus. So that is, it prefers the nerves. Now if you look into the pathology, so if such an that is after the death of the individual, if you look at the autopsy specimen, you can find something known as Bebe's nodule. This terminology you should remember. That is the characteristic nodules, they are known as microglial nodules that are formed because of an inflammatory reaction in the meninges. And then you have certain inclusions, cytoplasmic inclusions within the neurons, which are known as Negri bodies. So these two terminologies you can try to remember under the pathology. That is, if you see a specimen, a pathological specimen of a patient who has been of a brain specimen of a patient who has been infected with the rabies virus, post-mortem, usually you see these two characteristic features most often, that is Bebe's nodules and Negri bodies. Negri bodies are eosinophilic cytoplasmic inclusions within the neurons, whereas Bebe's nodules are microglial nodules because of inflammation. So this is a histopathological picture, that's what we had discussed. These are the Bebe's nodules. Because of inflammation, what you see, these are microglial nodules, whereas you have something known as another characteristic histopathological feature, that is a characteristic pathology feature would be a Negri body, that is an eosinophilic cytoplasmic inclusion within the neuron. If you look into where predominantly the virus goes and targets within the central nervous system, we have the cerebellum, hippocampus, brainstem neurons. So these might be responsible for the aggressive behavior, the hydrophobia, the aerophobia, that is typically because of the brainstem dysfunction. So these are some of the characteristic pathogenetic features that you can see following a virus inoculation. So the virion or the virus is supposed to be a bullet-shaped virus. And these are the negri bodies, the eosinophilic cytoplasmic inclusions within the neuron. Now we look into the clinical features. So this will be of much interest. Once what happens, again, to summarize, once the virus gets inoculated, it replicates, it goes and targets the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. From there, it ascends centripetally, it goes into the central nervous system, typically infecting the cerebellum, the brainstem, the hippocampus. From there, it descends and gets deposited within the skin, various organs, including the salivary glands and even the heart. So now we have various important clinical features. So initially there is an incubation period. As we had already discussed, it can be as short as a few days to even up to more than a year. This is when the virus actually is found in and around the site of inoculation. It is usually replicating there. This is a period where a patient usually doesn't have any significant clinical features, a prodromal phase. Then there is an acute neurological phase. It can either be in the form of an encephalitic rabies or a paralytic form. Encephalitic being the more common form. So during this prodromal phase, the patient doesn't have the characteristic clinical features. The patient might develop fever, tiredness or malaise, headache, nausea, vomiting. Sometimes the patient might be a little anxious or agitated. Most often patients might describe itching or pruritus or pain at the site of bite, at the site of exposure. This can be one alarming feature or an alarming sign which can point out to the fact that the patient might be infected, the person might be infected, so the person might develop paresthesias, pain or pruritus near the site of exposure. Following the prodromal phase, the patient develops the acute neurological dysfunction phase. It can be either in the form of encephalitic rabies or paralytic rabies. So what happens is due to the early brainstem involvement, the patient starts developing hydrophobia. So what happens is the pharyngeal muscle starts contracting and the diaphragm also starts contracting. So what happens is the patient starts developing difficulty in swallowing liquids and there is frothing. Similarly, there is a significant fear towards or a sudden contraction of the pharyngeal muscles, the respiratory muscles following exposure to a blow of wind. That is known as aerophobia. So hydrophobia and aerophobia are characteristic features of encephalitic form of rabies. The patient can even develop confusion, hallucination, seizures. Because of an autonomic instability, again due to the brainstem involvement, the patient can develop hypersalivation, cardiac arrhythmias. So in the encephalitic phase, typically what you see, as many of you would have seen in movies or any other mass media, that the patient suddenly starts developing frothing. That is due to hypersalivation followed by the pharyngeal muscle contraction. There is frothing in the mouth, and then gradually the patient can develop coma and finally or ultimately culminates in death. Again, a picture of the negri body, the cytoplasmic inclusions within the neuron. Now, this is a characteristic feature of the encephalitic rabies. So the patient has difficulty in swallowing. In response to swallowing liquids, the patient starts developing frothing. Even in response to air, the patient starts developing a vigorous contraction or spasm of the pharyngeal muscles, that is known as aerophobia. Now, another neurological manifestation would be paralytic rabies, though it is seen less commonly. Here, what happens is the patient develops muscle weakness, just like an elemental. The patient develops plantar muscle weakness. What happens is there is weakness starting from the site of bite, that is the bitten extremities, and it can even develop quadriparesis. Sphincter involvement can also be seen, that is the patient has loss of bladder control or bowel dysfunction. And slightly, the patient who has a paralytic form of rabies might have a slightly longer duration of survival compared to a patient who has developed an encephalitic form of rabies, though not often always true. If you look at the symptom course, initially there is a prodromal phase where the patient has very non-specific symptoms like fever or tiredness, that is malaise, headache, nausea, vomiting, and 50 to 80% of the patients can have pain or paresthesia, pruritus at the site of bite, the site of exposure. Then what happens is after the incubation period is over, once the neurological dysfunction begins, it can be either in the form of encephalitic rabies or paralytic rabies, encephalitic being the most common one. The encephalitic form, the patient develops characteristically aerophobia, hydrophobia, it can ultimately culminate in coma and death. If you look at the furious form or the encephalitic form, typically you have aerophobia, hypersensitivity to sound, to light, aggressiveness, convulsions, and finally coma. And due to autonomic disturbance, they have hypersalivation. Whereas the paralytic rabies, which is also known as dumb rabies, the patient starts developing weakness. Now again, to summarize the phase of rabies, there is an incubation period which can be as short as a few days to up to 3 months or even a year, rarely. And then there is a prodromal phase where the patient develops very non-specific symptoms. Then you have the acute neurological phase wherein the patient develops either encephalitic form or a paralytic form of rabies, slightly longer survival, probably in paralytic compared to encephalitic, finally culminating in death in almost all cases. Now, an important question would be, how do you identify, how do you diagnose a patient to have rabies? When your index of suspicion is high and there is a characteristic history suggestive of exposure to an infected animal, how do you diagnose it? So the routine investigations are again going to be non-specific. If you do a CSF analysis, it is going to show mild elevation in the WBC count and mild elevation in protein count. This is not very specific or not very suggestive of rabies. The brain is also going to be normal in most of the cases. MRI brain can have some non-specific changes in the brainstem, and EEG can also have some non-specific abnormalities. So what we actually use is to find out the rabies virus specific antibodies or to demonstrate the virus antigen from a skin biopsy specimen. So what you do is the areas, so the neural areas, so where the skin is well innervated, so you take a skin biopsy, or we can take a sample from the serum, saliva, to identify the virus specific antibodies. So if we find the specific antibodies in the CSF, it is almost always suggestive of rabies encephalitis. Then you can also use RT-PCR, that is polymerase chain reaction, to identify the virus RNA. That is, the virus RNA is amplified and it is identified from the sample, usually again the saliva, the skin, CSF, or if you get the brain tissue, mostly post-mortem, you can use it to identify it. This is a picture which depicts the positive bands, which show that this is a sample which has RNA of the rabies virus. So this is the antibody testing. So again, you use the skin biopsy specimen. You can also use saliva or a brain tissue, which is highly sensitive and specific. CSF sample, which has the virus RNA, the virus antibody is conclusive of rabies encephalitis. So this is how the antibody, that is a patient who has the rabies antibody, is going to show positive direct fluorescent antibody testing when you look under a fluorescence microscope. Now, a close differential diagnosis of rabies encephalitis can be other forms of encephalitis, especially the arboviral encephalitis like Weislein encephalitis, herpes simplex encephalitis, or an autoimmune encephalitis, that is the NMDA encephalitis. Or even a psychiatric illness can also be a differential diagnosis to rabies encephalitis. So it is highly essential to differentiate it from the other treatable causes of encephalitis. The paralytic form of rabies can also closely resemble Guillain-Barré syndrome. what you're going to do under investigation is basically to check the CSF for presence of viral antibodies, so the anti-rabies antibody. Now, once you are almost sure of the diagnosis, now treatment. Now, under treatment, the problem is, and there is no cure for rabies. There is no identified, or there is no established treatment for rabies. Previously, experimental therapy used to be done by using therapeutic coma, that is, placing a patient in an environment where he is not exposed to any of the external stimuli, or use of sedatives, use of antiviral drugs, and it has been found that it is not going to be helpful. So it's most often palliative. That is, usually in the Indian setups, most of the hospital settings used to have a room which is dark and quiet, without any of the external triggers that can precipitate the encephalitic form or the encephalitic manifestations. Now, so when you usually talk about rabies, it's vaccination that usually strikes first. So these two great gentlemen, that is Louis Pasteur and Emile Roux, these two, they were responsible for designing a vaccine or a preventive method for rabies. Louis Pasteur, who is actually attributed to have discovered a number of vaccines, is also one of the pioneers in identifying the virus or discovering the vaccine for rabies too. So we had already discussed in the opening slide that as early as 1800, this disease was found to be transmitted from a rabid dog to a healthy dog through contact with the saliva, through the bite. In 1885, as early as 1885, the vaccine was first developed by Louis Pasteur, and the use of rabies immunoglobulin along with the rabies vaccine was first advocated as early as 1889, and these Negre bodies were identified by around 1900. And later on, in 1954, that is during 1950s, almost 100 years after the identification or after the discovery of the rabies vaccine, WHO found that the combination of using antibodies, that is the rabies immunoglobulin along with the vaccine, is more effective than vaccine alone. And where all you use the rabies immunoglobulin, we'll discuss in the subsequent slide. Now, one individual who had become famous was Gianna. She was found to survive rabies infection without any vaccination, neither pre-exposure or post-exposure prophylaxis. That is when the use of therapeutic coma and antiviral drugs was thought to be helpful, but actually it was not because of the antiviral drugs or therapeutic coma. Later on, it was disproved that it has any beneficial use. And in 2000, the United States became free or eliminated of canine rabies. Now, the problem with rabies virus infection is that the prognosis is very grim. That is, death is almost always certain. So, therefore, the early treatment or early access to post-exposure prophylaxis is of utmost importance. Now, preventive strategies. Once a person is exposed to the saliva of a rabid animal, whether it be a dog, a cat, cattle, or even other wild animals, what do we have to do? So the animal has to be confined and observed for a period of almost 10 days. This is the protocol that is followed by the highly standardized Western countries, though it is not applicable in a developed country like us, where endemic canine rabies is still very, very prevalent. Now, usually if the animal remains healthy, post-exposure prophylaxis is not required, but once the animal starts developing signs of rabies, it has to be euthanized, or it has to be put to death, and the head taken to the lab, and the rabies virus testing, that is the direct fluorescent antibody testing, is performed, or virus can also be cultured. Other wild animals, apart from dogs, that is any other animal, apart from dogs, cats, or ferrets. This is the US gold standard. They should be euthanized immediately and the brain tissue should be immediately analyzed. Whereas in endemic countries like ours or in many of the African countries, once exposure is there, you have to start post-exposure prophylaxis as soon as possible. Only if there is a possibility of obtaining the tissue specimen or obtaining a sample from the rabid animal for DFA testing and the test comes to be negative for rabies virus, if there is very less chance of actually being a rabies infection, then probably post-exposure prophylaxis can be stopped. But it is highly always recommended to continue or to go ahead with post-exposure prophylaxis. So important is once a person is exposed, immediately extensive washing and local treatment of the bite should be initiated, then give a vaccine with or without the rabies immunoglobulin. So whereas rabies immunoglobulin indicated, it is in category 3 bites. So the exposure has been classified into 3. One, category 1 would include touching of the animal. Touching the animal, licks on intact skin, contact of the intact skin with secretions of the rabid animal. So here usually post-exposure prophylaxis is not required. So just a lick on intact skin, contact with secretions or excretions of the animal in an intact skin or touching of feeding animals, their post-exposure prophylaxis is not required. Whereas category 2 exposure is when the skin is exposed or there is uncovered skin and there is a nibbling, either licks or minor scratches without bleeding, abrasions without bleeding, all of that comes under category 2 where vaccination is required, where immunoglobulin, that is RIG or rabies immunoglobulin, is not required. Whereas category 3 is exposure to bats, exposure to skin with bleeding, so that is transdermal bites, scratches, licks, or contamination of the mucous membrane like contact with the eye. That requires vaccine along with these immunoglobulin, and that should be administered at 2 different sites as soon as possible. So post-exposure prophylaxis has already been described. There should be local intensive local care. That is, wound should be thoroughly washed and cleaned with soap and water, and you should initiate active as well as passive immunization whenever indicated. That is in category 3, you give passive immunization in the form of RIG or rabies immunoglobulin. Tetanus prophylaxis should be given. So if the person is that is after the vaccine, there should be a period of within 7 days the patient should be given RIG as and when indicated. So the dose of this rabies immunoglobulin will be 20 international units per kg. So this rabies immunoglobulin is usually infiltrated at the site of bite. So we had already described where in the 1890s this rabies immunoglobulin, use of rabies immunoglobulin along with the vaccine was found to be better than using the vaccine alone. People who have been previously vaccinated do not require RIG. Only in unvaccinated people you give RIG. Very minimal side effects can be expected. Now, the rabies globulin is going to bind to the virus before it enters the central nervous tissue. So once you give the vaccine, within a period of 7 days, you have to give the RIG because it is no longer useful once the virus enters the central nervous system. We have human rabies immunoglobulin as well as equine rabies immunoglobulin. That is after inoculating into the virus into either into the humans or into the horses. So the rabies immunoglobulin, which was more commonly used, was equine immunoglobulin, but it was found to have many side effects. And the vaccine and the immunoglobulin should be offered or should be given at different sites. Neither the same syringe nor a same site should be used. When you look into the rabies vaccine, this is a very, very important vaccine discovery. 1805, that is when Louis Pasteur discovered this vaccine. 1 ml dosage. Now the schedule is 4 doses. 1 ml doses given IM, usually in the deltoid. Gluteal site is usually not preferred because the penetration or the deposition of the vaccine would be less efficient in the via a gluteal administration. The first dose should be given as soon as possible after the exposure. That is known as the day 0 dose. In category 3 is usually given along with the rabies immunoglobulin and another site. Then following that you have it day 3, day 7 and day 14. Even pregnant people can be vaccinated because it is not a live vaccine. If possible, avoid immunosuppressive agents during the course of the post-exposure prophylaxis. Very minimal reactions, minimal side effects like local pain, erythema, that is redness, or swelling or itching, and minor systemic side effects like fever, joint pain, body pain, nausea, headaches can occur, but that should not be an indication to discontinue the vaccination. It is very, very essential to complete the 4 days of vaccination. Previously, the vaccine was obtained from culture and this neural tissue vaccine was used. The problem was following this neural tissue vaccine administration, many people started developing paralysis, like as in the form of Guillain-Barré syndrome. So now people have discontinued. Slowly it is phasing out. The neural tissue vaccine is no longer being used in most of the affluent countries. Now, if you have high possibility of coming into contact with animals, the people who are working with animals, that is the veterinary doctors, or people who are traveling to rabies endemic areas, can be administered with a pre-exposure prophylaxis. That is only for 3 days. Instead of day 3, you have 0, 7, and instead of day 14, you have either on the 21st day or on the 28th day. And the antibody level can be checked, and if required, a further dose can be given. And if a person has already been vaccinated and has been re-exposed to again an animal bite or an animal contact, you should avoid rabies immunoglobulin. You have to give just 2 doses of vaccine on day 0 and day 3. And as always, wound care is of utmost importance. Thoroughly wash the site with soap and water, and also administer antibiotics when required. If the tissue requires debridement, that should also be done. Tetanus prophylaxis also to be administered. So this is the algorithm for post-exposure prophylaxis. This is from Harrison's textbook, so it is a little impractical when compared to an endemic country like ours. There what they do is, if an animal like a dog, if it is a ferret or a cat, the animal is actually initially isolated and observed for 10 days and to see whether the the animal starts developing any features of rabies. Now, once the animal bite, if the animal bite does not dominate, that is, the skin is not exposed, usually prophylaxis is not required. Once the skin is exposed, then there is prophylaxis required, especially in an endemic country. If it is a non-endemic country like the United States or other developed countries, if the animal was not captured, then they give vaccination. If the animal was captured and the animal had not developed any features of rabies within a course of 10 days, usually vaccination is not given until the fluorescent antibody testing shows features of rabies. If it does not show, then no vaccination. This is the protocol, whereas in an endemic country like ours, as soon as there is a as soon as there is an exposure, if it is a category 2 or 3 exposure, we start with rabies post-exposure prophylaxis with and without the immunoglobulin. So to sum it up, rabies is actually a vaccine preventable viral disease. It is of utmost importance to discuss this infectious disease because vaccination is very effective, whereas if there is failure to undergo post-exposure prophylaxis, death is almost inevitable. So it is important to identify people who are exposed as soon as possible, get them vaccinated, Because once the incubation period is crossed and the virus starts affecting the neurons, then it is difficult to treat the disease as there is no established treatment and death is almost inevitable. And endemic countries mostly are the Asian and the African belt. WHO has actually initiated something known as United Against Rabies, a program to zero down the human death and eliminate the dog-mediated or the canine rabies by 2030. Immediate thorough wound washing with soap and water after contact with a suspected rabid animal is crucial and can save lives. Most of the deaths are from the African and the Asian belt. So this is again the summary of what has been discussed so far. Once there is exposure to the rabies virus, the virus initially gets inoculated after a bite by an infected animal, and the virus replicates. It goes and attaches itself to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. From there, it ascends centripetally into the central nervous system, causing neural dysfunction. Then it centrifugally goes and gets lodged within the salivary glands and various other organs, including the heart. Once the patient starts developing encephalitic or paralytic features of rabies, death is almost inevitable in a span of a few days to up to weeks. So it is important to identify early, to reduce the exposure as soon as possible, vaccinate the animals, including the pet animals as well as some of the strays to which you come into regular contact with. Make sure that there is no denuded skin area or there is no exposed skin area while feeding the animals. This doesn't mean that you should stop helping animals, strays. Make sure that they get vaccinated and you also have pre-exposure vaccination. And remember, when you give rabies vaccination, the rabies immunoglobulin should be given in another site, and it should be given within a span of maximum of within 1 week after administering the vaccine. And it is essential to complete the entire course of the vaccination. That is all for today's class. Thank you all for patient listening. In case of any doubts, kindly convey it via your class representative or mail me directly in the email ID aparnasudhakar1@gmail.com. Thank you all for your patient listening. Have a nice day. Thank you.